It looks like we have quorum. We're going to get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Alejandra Bravo, and I'm the chair of the Economic and Community Development Committee. We have quorum. I'm now calling meeting 17 to order. Welcome, everyone. Today's meeting is being held by video conference and in person at City Hall in Committee Room 1. This meeting is also being live streamed online at youtube.com/Toronto Council Live. We're all here. So before we start, I think it's a good moment to take a deep breath. And in the face of all of the items we have on the agenda today, first acknowledge the land we're on. This committee wants to acknowledge that we are on the land where many traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples, and that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We also want to acknowledge that Toronto is made up of treaty peoples, of which we are all, including those that came here as settlers, as migrants, either in this generation or generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent. If you are registered to speak at today's meeting, please listen for me to call your name. I will call speakers in the order they appear on the list. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the Economic and Community Development Committee page at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. Members, the City Clerk has provided all agenda materials on toronto.ca/council and on CMP, the Clerk's meeting portal. Clerk's IT staff are available if members, if you need help with your devices. I also want to remind you to please submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at ecdc@toronto.ca to help with motions. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, may I have a motion to confirm the minutes from our meeting on October 23rd, 2024? Councillor Moyes, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So we're now going to go to the agenda review. But before we doing that, as you can see today, we have reduced membership on the committee, 3 members, and we need to make sure that we maintain quorum so that we can complete the agenda. As such, I'm going to be moving that we limit public speakers, public presentations to 3 minutes, and that we close the speakers' agenda addition capacity at 10 a.m. So we're going to close the speakers list at 10 a.m. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you.
Chair, I'll be in my office for some of this meeting on WebEx.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher, for doing double duty to make sure that we can complete the agenda. We're going to start with the Ombudsman Toronto Housing Unit Status Report, and we're holding for speakers and questions for that. EC 17.2, a partnered approach to inclusive economic development. We're holding for presentation and speakers. EC 17.3, addressing reconciliation and equity via community funding. We're holding for speakers. EC 17.4, shelter safety action plan and contract amendments related to lodging for asylum seekers and refugees and community safety team services. We're holding for a presentation and for speakers. EC 17.5, implementation of the Canada-wide early learning and child care system and 2025 to 2029 child care and early years service plan update. We're holding for presentation and speakers. EC 17.6, an approach to support naturally occurring retirement communities, NORCs in Toronto. We're holding for speakers. EC 17.7, night economy working group update. We're holding for speakers. EC 17.8, proposed Cedarbrae Markham Lawrence Village Business Improvement Area poll results. And I want to recognize Councillor Ainsley, who is the councillor for this area. Would you like to speak, Councillor Ainsley, to this item?
Yes, please, Madam Chair, and I'll be very brief. I just wanted to ask the committees for their support for this proposed BIA in my ward. Members in Markham, Lawrence, Cedarbrae area have been working very hard with city staff and each other, extolling the benefits having a BIA. This will be the first one in my ward. In particular, I'd like to give a shout out to Alicia Vianga, who's been the driving force behind this BIA, spending countless hours working with property owners, business owners, city staff, and I can't thank her enough and all of the business owners, and I'm looking forward to having the first BIA in my ward. So I'd just like to ask the committee's support for this, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. Any other speakers on this item? I would like to move the item on behalf of Councillor Ainsley. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. EC 17.9, Toronto Francophone Affairs Advisory Committee requests in support of... I have 14. You're welcome to some of mine. Toronto Francophone Affairs Advisory Committee requests in support of Work Plan 2024 to 2026. I would like to... I have an amendment. That recommendation be amended to read as follows. Request the General Manager, Economic Development and Culture to invite representatives from Théâtre Français de Toronto to give a presentation at a future meeting of the Toronto Francophone Affairs Advisory Committee. And
Can you tell me why that shifted?
yeah, that was at the request of Théâtre Français.
Okay, thank you.
So on any other questions or speakers to this? On the amendment, all in favor? Item as amended, all in favor? Thank you, that's adopted, and that is the end of our agenda. So we will now be going to our first item, which is EC 17.1 Ombudsman Toronto Housing Unit Status Report 2024. There is a supplementary item, members, that was posted late yesterday, and we are going to go now to speakers. And our first speaker on this item is Miguel Avila Velarde. Welcome to committee. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning. Sorry, I'm having trouble, technical problems, but anyway, I just want to congratulate, first of all, for the Ombudsman report and making some sense to the landlord, Toronto Community Housing, to incorporate for the first time in the city of Toronto a building that is smoke-free, scent-free, and it helps a lot of the residents in the city of Toronto that have respiratory problems. And that property is located at 175 Oak Street, right in Regent Park. So I'm very proud of that we're making efforts, you know, because the human rights complaint that you guys received, many of them deal with health issues, mental health issues, physical issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to address the report, which was approved at the TCAC board at the last board meeting. It kind of went too fast. There was not much discussion about all the moving parts. For instance, the transfer priority process. I think that is being consulted with TCAC tenants and stakeholders. That has not been done yet completely. There are also recommendations, out of the 14 recommendations of the City Ombudsman, only 6 have been implemented. So it's a working process. And the other one is the human rights internal process, which has a lot of flaws, in my opinion. And that has been also shared with so many speakers coming to the TCAC board meetings and tell them, you know, that it's unbiased, it's not clear, it's difficult to understand. And also it's the process how you investigate yourselves with any third party. We have recommended that a third party take the investigations out instead of being inside in the house. Deal with your lawyers, dealing with your paralegals, who at the end of the day, they spin the story around and they make you look, oh, here we are again. Let's start from scratch. Let's investigate. We need more reports. I don't think we have heard you enough. I'm almost a senior. I'm 60 years old. And for the first time ever, I had to leave Regent Park. Maybe. I have put my request for transfer because residential noise bylaws, and I talked about this to my councilor, Chris Moyes, for making some changes to 311, so that noises that are not currently being investigated are given consideration. And that is what happens in my building at 220 Oak Street.
You're out of time.
We're having noises.
Thank you.
And you want me to go back in the topic?
No, you're out of time.
I am out of time. I just want to conclude and say that one minute, please allow me this opportunity. Please put this on the screen. This is my mom. She passed away 2 days ago.
So we have
I'm going to ask Chris Moyes, can you please put her name on the
Thank you.
council meeting, please?
Yeah, please
She died 2 days
wrap
ago.
up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So on the item, are there any questions? I believe the Ombudsman is here. Do we have questions? The Ombudsman is here.
Oh,
No? Okay, any speakers? I'm sorry, we're going to hold this down for speakers because we're still working on this. We may have questions. So we're just going to hold this down right now, if that's okay. You have a question? No. Okay. We're going to hold this down until we have clarified. There a motion that will come with this. Okay. Thanks. To the next item, EC. Yeah, we're going to hold this down. EC 17.2, a partnered approach to inclusive economic development. I'd like to invite Pat Tobin to give a presentation and potentially some colleagues who he will introduce. Thank you.
Bravo, Chair, we'll just take a moment.
Yes, thank you. Start when you're ready.
And clerks, while we get connected, are distributing hard copies of the presentation to committee members. Thanks very much, Councilor Bravo, as chair, and to the committee. My name is Pat Tobin. I'm the General Manager of Economic Development and Culture. I'm accompanied by my colleague, Mariana Mota, who is our Manager of Strategic Policy. We're here today to talk to you about a partnered approach to inclusive economic development, and I'll provide a bit of context as to why we're here now. The city and council's commitment towards inclusive economic development goes back almost a decade. In October 2015, City Council voted to adopt vision, objectives, recommendations, and actions to be included in TO Prosperity, the Toronto Poverty Reduction Strategy, that, among other actions, develop models to enhance economic development in low-income areas. So there has been an ongoing commitment of council to see economic development become more inclusive in the City of Toronto. More recently, at ECDC, the committee provided direction earlier this year when a report was brought forward by 4 signatory divisions with a proposed inclusive economic development framework, that more work was needed. Among the issues that the committee recognized, while being generally supportive of the approach, there was a desire to see IED as an element of a broader economic development system, and that it required greater collaboration between labor, the not-for-profit sector, internal to the city, across city divisions, and the private sector. So with that direction from July 2024, staff working with the committee chair undertook a community consultation in September of 2024, where over 20 institutional and community stakeholders who work in Toronto on inclusive economic development came together to discuss definitions, principles, and the work necessary to arrive at a framework. Through that work, definitions were concluded with respect to both inclusive economic development and community economic development in such a way that community economic development needs to be seen as meeting the social and economic rights of Toronto residents, using city levers to support, alongside community partners, accessible pathways to employment and decent work, skills training and entrepreneurship for residents and communities that have not historically benefited from economic growth in the past. In such a manner, IED focuses on ensuring democratic processes for inclusive outcomes shaped by and accountable to communities and neighborhoods. With respect to community economic development, this is understood as the place-based application of IED principles. One can imagine a precinct development plan where the community development plan embraces IED principles in the articulation of specific interventions at the local level. So what are those IED principles? As arrived at the September consultation with community, there are effectively 5 that underpin the proposed approach to inclusive economic development that this report contains. 1, that it centers the social and economic rights of residents of Toronto. Number 2, that it values the meaningful participation of the people impacted by decision-making in economic development policy. 3, it works in close partnership with private sector, labor-based organizations, and the not-for-profit sector. And certainly there's been a greater emphasis to achieve balance across the latter 2 sectors identified there. 4, IED enables training, job pathways, and working conditions that provide economic security and decent work across a broad range of sectors. And finally, 5, IED creates the conditions for communities and workers to build wealth and for wealth to remain and circulate in the local economy. With respect to next steps, as an immediate next step, with the passage of this report through council, should that occur, there will be an IED working table that will leverage the expertise and co-develop with community a IED framework built off of the definitions and principles that we've just described. And we will bring back a fully fleshed out IED framework to this committee in early 2026, which will reflect the alignment of all City of Toronto relevant divisions in advancing strategies towards inclusive economic development and in application of the IED principles. Such a framework, and we'll conclude on this, would clarify IED roles and responsibilities across city divisions and agencies, such as was the desire of this committee in July 2024. And that would be further defined by a governance and accountability model to include a report back structure on the progress of IED's application by the city. Note also that at the last session of council in November, the action plan for Toronto's economy was adopted, which provided direction to staff to undertake this work and return to committee. That's the presentation for you today, and we are happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you for that. We're going to go to speakers, and then we'll come back to you for any questions. We have one speaker. Rosemary Powell, Toronto Community Benefits Network. Welcome to committee. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Bravo. This morning, I really wanted to be here personally to present and to thank the Economic and Community Development Committee. So TCBN, on behalf of the Toronto Community Benefits Network, our board, our staff, our members, really want to thank the chair, especially Councillor Alejandra Bravo, and the members of the Economic and Community Development Committee and city staff for bringing forward the beginning steps towards the development of Toronto's first ever inclusive economic development framework. This is a really great milestone. In March, the TCBN submitted a letter to the Economic and Development Committee raising concerns about the draft IEDF and staff report, urging the committee to include more input and feedback from community-based organizations and groups. We would like to thank Councillor Bravo again for convening stakeholders in September, of which included a diverse representation of stakeholders from community, labor, environment, private sector, foundations, and anchor institutions. Some of the important revisions that we see reflected in the city's report today includes 1, a revised definition and principles that is centered on social and economic rights. 2, the recognition that the city has levers and tools to support and advance inclusive economic development in Toronto. And 3, a commitment to co-develop actions and indicators through a working table and a partnered approach. This is really great. Today, the city is facing significant challenges, including 16.3% youth unemployment rate, the highest since April 2014, and Black youth unemployment rate of 24.3% in Toronto. 21.7% poverty rate, the highest among all urban centers in Canada and surrounding regions in the GTHA. Rising inequality, with the top 10% of Toronto tax filers earn more than $106,700 per year, while more than half of Toronto tax filers earn below $38,500 per year. The discrepancy is huge, which is significantly below the $45,600 considered as a living wage. So in recent months, we have been working alongside community and labor partners, including Social Planning Toronto, the Toronto and York Region Labor Council, and the Toronto Environmental Alliance, amongst others, to identify gaps and recommendations for improvement. And what we'd like to see the city include is that the city partner with the working table to integrate community, public, and nonprofit ownership, the city's climate lens and circular economy principles, the care economy and gender equity, and working rights in the gig economy into the IED framework. We have a number of other...
You have to wrap up, but we can ask follow-up questions.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a number of other recommendations, which we've shared in a letter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? My question is, would you like to share the rest of your recommendations?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. Thank you. All right, thank you. Yes, so our other recommendations include to build IED reporting directly into the annual reporting on the action plan for Toronto's economy. In addition, we request that staff report back within 6 months, including progress and how the new action plan for Toronto's economy initiatives have incorporated the principles of the IED framework. Essentially, we want to make sure that it's fully integrated. Want to make sure that we include the Transform TO Net Zero strategy in the list of the relevant plans, strategies, and programs that will apply to the IED definition and principles. Want to include children's services in the list of relevant divisions to be involved in the development of the framework. And we want to consult and engage vulnerable groups, including residents experiencing housing precarity, newcomers, and individuals living on low incomes, to inform and participate in the development of the IED framework and ongoing monitoring and evaluation. Essentially, nothing for us without us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you for coming to committee. Questions of staff? Councillor Moyse?
Again, I thank you for the report and the work that's gone into it so far. what is the financial impact of this report? Again, we have all these grandiose ideas, and it's hard to really see the value of it or it being implemented in some way, in the way that we envision it. I know in this agenda, we have the Ignite Economy report as well. And anyways, I'll stop there for now.
Through the chair to you, Councillor Moyes, thank you for the question. At this stage, what the report seeks from committee is approval of definitions and a process to undertake the elaboration of a framework. In such a way, it'll come back to this committee in 2026 with more detail around implementation. To provide an estimate of financial impacts at this point would be difficult to do. Last thing I would note is, however, IED is in many ways more about the how than the what, meaning the city council just passed this month an action plan for Toronto's economy. And what this report proposes to do is ensure that in the application of each of the measures to grow the economy, that these principles around inclusive economic development be applied. So in that manner, we would not anticipate that there would be a significant incremental increase in the implementation, but that it would be more about working differently within existing resources.
Are any of these principles being applied now?
Through the chair to you, Councillor Moyes, they are being applied. I think in the conversation at this committee in July of 2024, what we heard from committee members was a sense that while the city, further to the preamble to your question, has many strategies, it was difficult for the committee and council to track the broad implementation of inclusive economic development activity, and there was a desire for precise definitions, co-developed with community, thereafter a framework, an accountability structure, and then clear metrics and a report back cycle.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I guess I'll ask a couple of questions. The speaker identified a few things that people are excited about, and that's great to hear in relation to the framing around social and economic rights. I believe is new, and maybe for the first time we are talking in this way. Are there any comments about, from your perspective, how we got here and what it means to recognize that people have inherent value and rights in every part of the city?
Through you as chair of the committee, Councillor Bravo, yeah, the concept of economic rights, as noted, have been discussed by this city council going back for some time, but without perhaps the precision that is sought here. Secondly, there's a desire to relate to best practice as it's operating globally, and there is work certainly that was cited during the September session from the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights that was ratified by Canada in 1976, and what has been the evolution of that conversation in policy circles since. So that work will continue towards the finalization of a framework for 2026 coming back to this committee.
Thank you. In relation to the question of some of the affiliated or existing strategies, maybe I'll ask the executive director, I think, of Social Development and Finance, about how this framework can interact with the work that SDFA is doing. What are the possibilities and why are these particular strategies named in relation to this framework?
Thank you for the question, Chair Bravo. We are excited about the inclusive economic development framework because it certainly is, oh, sorry, let me get a little closer. It certainly is about a number of divisions coming together, working specifically with community leadership to better integrate some of our key strategies and some of our key levers in support of embedding equity into our economic development work. So we certainly see the work that we're doing in support of poverty reduction, in support of confronting anti-Black racism, newcomers, et cetera, that are really about underpinning community economic development and people's economic participation in our city to be uplifted in this work, and it is reinforcing that multiple divisions and agencies of the city, a different way of thinking and advancing our work. So we see this as an important evolution to support key strategies that are important to council and community.
It's great to hear an integrated horizontal approach to the people that have been most excluded in our local economy, but who are going to be at the table in defining the solutions for themselves. And that's good to hear about this cross-divisional collaboration. Finally, back to economic development, I'd like to ask about some of the questions that have been raised that are very significant and have came up in our conversations about this item before. In relation to social ownership, the community and public ownership, integrating climate objectives, which are in Transform TO, involving care work, the city divisions that are responsible for care work, such as childcare and some of these conversations, and then the decent work questions around, for example, the growth in gig work. Can these be some of the items that the working table lifts up, in your view, in relation to building up the framework and reporting back?
Through you as Chair, Councilor Bravo, yes, they can. As my colleague, the Executive Director, Social Development Finance Administration said, this work will continue with community. And in addition to Rosemary Powell's deputation, there's correspondence received by committee that does provide a list that many of the partners who participated in the September workshop would like to see continued work on, and that provides a good starting point for the continued conversation.
Thanks very much, and that's my time. Any speakers? I guess I'm going to speak on this. I'm really delighted of where we got here. The participation of community-based partners, citywide organizations, labor, both from the unionized side and also from the non-union side, and place-based organizations have made this so much stronger. People know their realities in their own communities. They know the problems they face, and they should be and have to be involved in crafting the solutions to those problems. I think we find that when we do that, we're starting to ask questions about what kind of economy we actually want. And in this case, we're talking about the fact that we're all the economy. Everybody, no matter what their condition, is part of the Canadian economy. It's part of the Toronto economy. And I like to think of the economy as the place and the way that we take care of our responsibilities to each other. I think that the shift to naming place is incredibly powerful, because where we're making huge advances in terms of democratizing the local economy, it's rooted in a place. And the reason that we're doing that at the city level with the private sector has been the demand and the call from local communities. And I think about the work that's been done around a community development plan with a secondary plan and Jane Finch. That came from the ground up. Those demands came from the ground up. This report recognizes that it takes more than one division in one place, one strategy, to make sure that people who have been disadvantaged while participating in the economy have inherent rights and power, and that we are going to search for those solutions together. The long reporting timeline doesn't mean that work won't get done, and I will certainly be watching this very closely. I think what it means and what we see in this report is that we're talking about co-creation, co-development, and this is an important way for city government to turn the chairs outward and to be very integrated with the work that's being done in community, and in many ways that community is doing with the private sector. So this is a powerful piece for me as well. The inclusion of specific levers, which the Rosemary in her deputation mentioned, I think is also crucial here, because we're naming the ways in which municipal government can make a difference in democratizing the local economy and looking for more equitable outcomes. This is, I think, a powerful piece as well. And I think that meaningful participation in decision-making being recognized this way as a foundational principle is also something that I'd like to highlight. I think it's also crucial that we're very clear about how municipal government can incentivize community wealth building, the relationship of building community wealth to the capacity of people to see better outcomes, better social and economic outcomes, more safety, more local security, a better futures for children and youth, while recognizing that poverty and measures to address poverty specifically are still needed. I like to think of community wealth building and poverty reduction as two sides of the same coin, and I think that we're seeing this recognized here, and it's very exciting. I'm very much looking forward to the year ahead, to this process, and I want to recognize that none of this would have been possible without the diligent, dedicated, open-hearted involvement of staff in this, the deep conversations that staff have had with councillors in this committee, with community, the innovative ideas that are being put forward, the cross-divisional collaboration. There has been an incredible amount of deep thinking, working together, and I so really want to thank staff at Economic Development and Culture for their work and the collaboration of Social Development Finance Administration. I think we have something really powerful and beautiful to look ahead to, and I find this incredibly personally important moment for me as someone who comes out of this sector and has worked with a lot of these community-based organizations. And I want to say finally to all of you who came to Depute, who wrote letters, who have met together, who have deliberated, who showed up on September 13 at our meeting, who have continued to meet, and who see in this the prospect for working in a powerful way with the city. I want to thank you for everything that you do every day. So, any other speakers? All right, on the item, all in favor? And that's carried. Thanks, everyone. Our next item is EC 17.3, addressing reconciliation and equity via community funding. And we have, at this time, two speakers. We're going to go first to Don Sutherland, and then we'll go to Lindsay Kretschmer.
Dawn is running late in traffic. Could you go to Lindsay first?
Okay, we're going to hold a moment for Don, who will arrive shortly, and we're going to go to Lindsay Kretschmer, Toronto Aboriginal Support Services Council. Is Lindsay online? Okay. Hi, Lindsay. Welcome to committee. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, we'll go. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning to speak to this item. I just wanted to share my own sort of perspective on the experience of crafting the Indigenous Funding Framework in partnership with the City of Toronto, namely SDFA. Shout out to Jenny Hoffman and Lindsay Jackson and the folks on their team who have been really instrumental to getting us to the place of having crafted this framework, which we believe will be very transformative as it relates to notions of truth and reconciliation in the city's broader commitment to working with Indigenous people in the City of Toronto. The Indigenous Funding Framework is the first of its kind. I've been in the nonprofit sector for well over 2 decades, having to, advocate and work tirelessly to fit within prescriptive funding framework models that are often transactional by design. The Indigenous funding framework really does take us away from that sort of transactional notion of a relationship to a deeper relationship that's more human-centric, that takes us to a deeper understanding and awareness of what co-development looks like, how to create space for self-determination, how to create parity parity in funding access and equality. I think we've also built in sort of not only principles, concepts, and also I would say actions through the efforts of the IFF to date. We've seen some tremendous and extraordinary transformation to the sector. So, we went from a place of looking at open data on City of Toronto community investment programs across the board, where we were seeing, historic sort of trends and patterns of funding inequality or disparity with respect to funding Indigenous nonprofits and initiatives, toward, the last 5 years of seeing a steadily climbing increase toward funding all initiatives. There are an estimated 30 Indigenous-led non-for-profit incorporated organizations of the city and countless other collectives and other organizations that have since been funded through the City of Toronto's efforts as a result of some of the advocacy and collaboration we've done toward getting us to this point. We've also seen interest from foundations and other levels of government and other cities in the work that we're doing with respect to developing this framework. And again, we remain very hopeful that implementation will take us to a deeper understanding of why creating a self-determined Indigenous funding framework is important. We've seen, as I said, extraordinary results as a result of having a self-determined, less prescriptive funding model that does not compromise on the integrity or the values of accountability with respect to the ways in which funding is managed. So it's important to note that as well. And more importantly, again, we've built this sort of relationship, I think, that takes us to a deeper understanding of why these issues matter, why self-determination and community basket approach of taking what you need and leaving what you don't has been very promising, I think, and also very fiscally responsible, in my opinion. So just expression of thanks and gratitude to our friends at the City of Toronto for the work to this point and the work that's yet to come. Yawago, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions of the deputant? No, thank you for coming to committee. Is Dawn Sutherland here? I think what we'll do is take a short recess to allow, or can we? We're going to hold this for now until Dawn is here, and we'll move on to the next item, if that's okay with the committee members. The next item is EC 17.4, Shelter Safety Action Plan and contrast amendments related to lodging for asylum seekers and refugees and community safety team services, and we have a presentation. Welcome to Gord Tanner, General Manager of Toronto Shelter Services and Supports Division, and all right. Sorry about that. Someone had their device on speaker and was broadcasting something in the committee room. Welcome, Gordon. Maybe you can introduce Joseph.
You bet. Good morning, committee members. Chair Bravo, Gord Tanner here, as you say, General Manager of Toronto Shelter and Support Services, and I'm joined here by Joseph Stalteri, who's our Director of Strategic Programs. And we're here to provide you a brief presentation on the report we have before you at committee today. So we were asked to report back on the development of a shelter safety action plan in response to a study done by the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which we presented to this committee in April of this year. In addition to presenting the Shelter Safety Action Plan, this report seeks council authority to implement a new tracking tool for incidents of anti-Black racism, provides an update on our work to enhance harm reduction and overdose prevention, as well as mental health case management support for people living outdoors, seeks authority to amend 3 contracts, 2 for community safety teams and 1 for the Canadian Red Cross. And finally, we're seeking authority to reimburse churches and community organizations that supported our refugee response in the summer of 2023. So some background. We approached CAMH in 2021 about the growing number of behavioral incidents that we were experiencing in the shelter system. And they partnered with us on a 2-year study which examined factors that contribute to physical and psychological safety in shelters for staff and service users. The final report proposed 22 recommendations to improve safety and was received by this committee in April of this year. Over the course of the summer, we worked to develop a shelter safety action plan informed by the CAMH recommendations and developed consultation with shelter providers, shelter workers, people with lived experience, the Housing Rights Advisory Committee, and a roundtable with mental health service providers and other city partners. The people we talked with validated the recommendations from the CAMH study, and key themes from these meetings indicated that staff need additional adequate training on providing trauma-informed care. We need to enhance our ability to respond to crises and to de-escalate situations. We need more supports for our shelter staff and outreach workers, and we need greater access to mobile mental health supports. The Shelter Safety Action Plan we propose includes 14 actions to be undertaken over the next 36 months in 3 key areas: supports for staff safety, supports for client safety, and improving system-wide oversight on safety. So actions to advance staff safety include continuing measures to protect the physical and psychological well-being of our staff, and particularly our Indigenous, Black, racialized, and 2S LGBTQ+ staff. To review and strengthen the training for all of our staff included targeted training that includes supporting clients who use methamphetamines. And to support the implementation of key actions and the city's ongoing commitment to confront anti-Black racism, we are seeking authority to embed a notification tool in our shelter management information system and launch a new reporting tool to document and track staff experiences of anti-Black racism in the workplace. This slide shows you the current number of workplace violence incidents in shelters since early 2022. And in tracking this data and based on a number of initiatives that are underway, I'm happy to report that these incidents have dropped by about 38%. We'll continue to track these as we implement our shelter safety action plan. So actions to advance client safety include facilitating and expanding access to health and harm reduction services, developing specialized programming to support people with extensive histories of violence or service restrictions, and to prioritize them for supportive housing. Initiatives we have underway in this area include our substance use and overdose prevention programming in some of our larger shelter sites, and continuing to work with partners to deliver low-barrier mental health and primary care to people living outdoors. This slide shows you also the current number of service restrictions occurring in Toronto shelters. So as you can see, the number has dropped considerably, about 49% since 2021, and it's been trending down with the trending down of reported workplace violence incidents. The final area of focus are actions to improve system-wide oversight on safety. And here we will be developing further guidance for the sector on the use and consistency of service restrictions to strengthen the process for people to access information if they do have service restrictions, and monitor the new behavioral risk alert system, which increases information sharing about safety issues across the shelter sector. Initiatives currently underway include implementing the Homelessness Services Capital Infrastructure Strategy to make new physical shelter infrastructure accessible, safer, and better aligned to meet the needs of our staff and diverse clients. Furthering the development of community safety teams or the deployment of those teams to support larger shelter locations and encampments. So I'll end it there, and I look forward to any questions you may have on the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We may very well have questions, but we're going to go to speakers now. Thanks for the presentation. The first speaker is Samantha Di Bologna. Is Samantha online? Oh, hi. Oh, hi, Samantha. Welcome to committee, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Thanks, Councilor. Thanks, Councilor Bravo. Good morning. My name is Samantha Di Bologna, and I'm the manager of policy at Maytree, a charitable foundation focused on advancing systemic solutions to poverty through human rights-based approach. I'm here to discuss the Shelter Safety Action Plan, a plan that has the potential to improve the conditions of the city shelter system for both residents and the staff who support these critical services. While the current plan is more of a high-level overview of the changes we can expect in the coming months, we're pleased to see some of its broad areas of action. These include better supporting staff, creating safe and accessible spaces for people who use substances, exploring how to link and support people to housing and other supports, and importantly, reviewing and improving the use of service restrictions in shelters. These actions can help to address some of the discrimination that people may face, and hopefully will prevent the forced eviction of people who often need the deepest levels of support. We're also pleased to see that the city engaged with people with lived experience of the system in the plan's development. However, the CAMH shelter safety study that was used to inform this plan also pointed to challenges with several city policies that so far aren't addressed. These are policies that limit autonomy and privacy for residents, such as those that limit access to secure storage for belongings. The city should take care to ensure that the important information collected from the CAMH study on city policies and through other engagements about how people are experiencing the system are reviewed in further iterations of the plan. But taking a rights-based approach will also mean more than examining procedures alone. It will mean reviewing the built environment of the shelter system, mechanisms for feedback, and the objectives and targets to monitor the plan's success. In terms of the condition of the city shelters, the CAMH shelter safety study noted that overcrowding was a significant issue. While some of the plan's recommendations could help with this over time, there's a need to address how well shelters are meeting resident needs now, especially in the winter months. The city can also consider how to improve accommodations for people with disabilities, informed by the city's audits of shelter accessibility. In addition, while we're glad to see that there is a plan to improve the complaint resolution process, it will be important to ensure that this takes a people-centered approach. This is one that empowers residents to know and exercise their rights, free from retaliation, and in terms of building trust as well. This is something that you will have heard from the Housing Rights Advisories Committee's feedback. In addition, people with lived experience of the shelter system need to be continuously engaged, not just in the development, but as it's implemented. And lastly, to ensure the plan's success, there needs to be clear objectives, monitoring tools, and roles and responsibilities for city staff. While we support approving this plan, there are opportunities to further ground it in a rights-based approach as it's implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the deputant? No? Thanks very much for being here today. The next speaker is Callum Houston, or Houston? Callum? Is Callum here online? Not at present. The next speaker is Edward Pereira from Toronto Shelter Network. Edward is online. Edward, welcome to committee. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Edward Pereira, and I'm TSN's project coordinator for the Pipeline Project. The Toronto Shelter Network represents more than 34 organizations that collectively deliver Toronto's 24-hour homelessness services. TSN is deputing to express our support for the recommendations brought forward in the Shelter Safety Action Plan. Toronto's shelter system has been faced with tremendous pressure since the pandemic began. Over 12,000 people are currently in shelters and bridging programs. There are over 200 encampments, and over 230 callers to central intake are not matched with beds. Many shelter hotels have closed, including the Delta Hotel, a 400-bed shelter hotel that stopped taking admissions this month. Over 6,000 people are refugee claimants. Supervised consumption sites are anticipated to close at the end of March 2025. There is overcrowding in shelters, insufficient mental health and harm reduction supports, NIMBYism for new and existing projects, and an urgent need for safe, adequate, affordable, and supportive housing and better income supports. Toronto Shelter and Support Services requested access to TSN 6-sector table meetings, plus an all-member meeting to represent the CAMH report and ask for input from our member agencies. There was also a full session with the representatives of the Shelter and Housing Advisory Committee. It was clear from these sessions that there is a need for consistency and follow-up regarding service restrictions within organizations and across the sector, as interpretations vary wildly. Standards for accountability, transparency, service delivery, and treatment in the application of service restrictions needs to be developed using a trauma-informed, human rights, anti-oppression, and anti-racism approach with a focus on restorative justice. More focus needs to be placed on the physical and psychological safety of Black staff and clients who endure racism daily. Staff training is key, and there is also a need for more specialized supports for those with many service restrictions. Funding disparities result in service inconsistencies. Mental health and harm reduction supports need to be available in every shelter. TSSS are addressing this now over a multi-year plan, but increased funding could accelerate this timeline. Other physical, recreational, and social programming is also important and will create safer environments for both staff and clients. The Government of Ontario must recognize that supervised consumption sites are crucial to the well-being of those with substance use issues and should be a part of the system, which includes treatment at the new homelessness and addiction recovery treatment centers. TSN urges the Economic and Community Development Committee to adopt the recommendations of the General Manager of the Toronto Shelter and Support Services, the Executive Director of the Housing Secretariat, and the Chief Procurement Officer, and approve the recommendations of EC 17.4. I'd like to thank the Madam Chair and the committee members for this opportunity to speak.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the deputant? No, thank you for coming to committee today. We now have Callum Houston, who is online, and we'd like to welcome Callum to committee. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'll make it brief, since much of what I was going to say has already been reiterated. The report outlining city commitments to improve shelter safety for staff and shelter residents. It also includes some specific measures to increase safety for residents who use drugs, recognizing that they face many risks in shelter settings, such as violence, drug poisoning, stigma, and discrimination from even the staff themselves. But there's still some of this positioning is, some of the positioning towards people who use drugs, it's still problematic, especially when it comes to shelter safety and violence. The report points to programming that staff say has worked well in areas for improvement in harm reduction and overdose prevention in large shelter hotels, including all sorts of other community, like safety teams, encampment, reimbursing Black-led churches. There's a lot of good things in there, but the city does need to recognize of this impending emergency and the deadly impact that it will have on the unhoused community. Also, I advocate that you guys stand up to the province, publicly oppose policies and approaches that have evidence shows actually will harm people or make it harder for them to secure permanent housing. And to continue to deliver evidence-based supports within the shelter system. I think that's very much key to improving people's conditions. That's pretty much everything. Like I said, I wanted to keep it brief.
Thank you, Callum. Any questions for the deputant? Seeing none, thank you. Next up is Savannah Wilson, Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness. Are you here? Okay, 3 minutes. Oops, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor. My name is Savannah Wilson. I'm with the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness Network.
Can you hold for a second, please?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, you may continue. Thank you.
I'm with the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness, a network of over 100 partners across the city united in a vision of ending homelessness. I want to commend the city's initiative to engage CAMH to do the shelter safety study. And this safety plan is an excellent first step towards a more just, inclusive, and safe shelter system for everyone. It's iterative, it's thoughtful, it's a phased approach that supports sustainable and realistic improvements, and it sets the foundation for long-term success. I think that the move away from punitive measures such as service restrictions, which do little to improve safety and only move individuals who commit harm further to the margins, is an excellent and encouraging part of this plan. And the focus on staff safety, trauma-informed training, crisis intervention, and de-escalation skills will reduce reliance on police involvement in emergency services, and the psychological health and well-being strategy ensure that staff have the supports and tools that they need to manage their own experiences in the shelter system. I do want to point to a couple of pieces of feedback. One is on the proposed exploration of a pilot to focus on centralized case management models. This is a really encouraging and welcome proposal. However, I do think that it's important to recognize that pilots exist and they must be implemented and scaled. So to that point, I want to uplift the work of the Beyond Housing pilot, which was a collaborative project between TAH, the MAP Center for Urban Health Solutions, Dixon Hall, and Loft Community Services. This pilot provided care conferencing, long-term case management, and continuity of care support for residents in hotel shelters. Early evaluations show a clear need for centralized care models, particularly for clients who frequently move around the system. And we're now working with the Coordinated Access team to identify opportunities to scale that up. I want to quickly point to a piece of concern that I have around the behavioral risk alert safety system. While the plan to implement reporting tools to improve tracking of harm in the system is important, it does not address or prevent harm or violence. Studies from MAP Center for Urban Health Solution and the Homeless Hub highlight the risks of a behavioral alert system. Flagging individuals as risky can lead to discrimination, further marginalization, especially if the system fails to account for the nuanced context of their behavior. Over-surveillance can also erode privacy, foster distrust, and increase disengagement from services. To that end, it's neither effective in addressing the root causes of harm in the system, like the lack of mental health care and increasingly volatile and unpredictable substance use support systems, and a lack of deeply affordable and supportive housing options. These are central to both the Shelter Safety Plan and the Homelessness Services Capital Infrastructure Strategy, and more transparent implementation of the monitoring of that system could mitigate the risk of the system undermining the very goals of the safety plan itself.
Thank you very much. I know that you rushed to finish, but do you have any other, did you have any other comments that you weren't able to make?
I think I'm very pleased to see restorative justice named in this report. I would like to invite and encourage the exploration into restorative justice models to also include moving beyond restorative justice towards transformative justice. It promotes collective responsibility and is a tool to build and change systems to prevent harm rather than just respond to it.
Thank you. Any other questions of the deputant? Nope. Seeing none, we'll go to the next speaker, Justine Neda-Arisa. Is Justine online? Welcome, Justine Neda-Arisa. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, good morning. Thank you to the Economic and Community Development Committee for allowing me to speak today. My name is Justine Neda-Arisa. I'm a healthcare provider, community member, constituent of the city in Ward 9, and a former shelter worker. I'm here to speak in support of the Shelter Housing Justice Network demands and echo the many of the comments that have been said before me. Many of the recommendations outlined in this Shelter Safety Action Plan fail to address the shelter condition that inherently contribute to a lack of safety for service users and contribute to medicalizing, pathologizing, dehumanizing unhoused people who are accessing support. Much of what constituents safety focuses especially on staff safety and decontextualizes these conditions from the current escalating housing emergency across the city. A response to safety that does not adequately consider unsafe, inhumane, and punitive conditions that exist within the shelter system will fail to offer meaningful solutions for unhoused people and staff working in these environments. I work within a team that provides outreach and primary care to unsheltered Torontonians. As a team outreach worker, I support many community members with housing applications, system navigation, accompaniment to support in hospital visits. I ensure they're still connected to registered nurses and a family physician for medical treatment and interventions, often trying to also seek shelter for the folks that we support. I refer to them for additional services that are imperative to their health while they remain outside. Our team is often called to places such as emergency departments, general medicine wings, and ICUs to meet clients in hopes to continue care. Most of our clients get discharged from the hospitals to the streets, often medically stable on paper, but left to keep wounds clean and continue follow-up care in settings that are not fit for such purposes, such as tents, alleyways, parks, bus shelters. Healing without a home or a shelter is near impossible. We're often faced with the torturous effort to seek shelter for folks who desperately want inside, but are rarely successful due to the lack of shelter capacity. When and if folks access shelter supports the conditions of the congregate settings, ensure the spread of contagious diseases and a lack of privacy and rest, patronizing rules like curfew, no decision-making, little autonomy, no privacy, inability to lock one's door, and more shelters are using security. While working in shelters, it became clear to me that there is no security of tenure where the power imbalance between shelter staff and residents can result in people being discharged or banned from indoor spaces when there is actually nowhere to go. In winter, in this weather, this is a death sentence. Unhoused people are left with no options and the impossible choice of entering a system of control and punishment, of staying outside where they risk severe injury, being criminalized, harassed, or freezing to death once discharged or relocated. Above all, people living outside face extreme weather, including cold rain, freezing temperatures in winter. This increases the severe injury and death in the winter when people do not have access to safe indoor spaces. We're often left to respond to these crises with few to no responses of what is deemed safe. It's imperative that we acknowledge that workers in shelters and supportive housing systems are often precariously housed and predominantly marginalized people put in impossible
Hi, sorry,
positions.
you're at time, so can you please wrap up?
Yep. Throughout the years of doing shelter work, I learned that the approach of navigating drug use amidst a toxic drug supply is waved off by staff without emergency. I
Thank
really
you.
believe that.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask you to say, was there any other concluding comments that you weren't able to make? Go ahead.
Yeah, safe shelter and housing justice for everybody.
Thank you very much. Any other questions of the deputant? Seeing none, we'll go to Joshua Feldman. Joshua Feldman. Oh, here you are. Welcome to committee. You have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Is this all right?
Yeah,
okay, thanks.
very well.
My name is Josh Feldman, and I'm here representing Health Providers Against Poverty. In response to community advocacy from diverse groups, including people with lived experience of homelessness, outreach and community workers, as well as healthcare providers, the City of Toronto has improved winter access to shelter and respite centers. We commend these efforts. However, these changes are insufficient to keep people struggling to live in the city safe and housed. By the City of Toronto's own admission, these increases will fall unacceptably short. The city's 2024-2025 winter plan states the number of people in need of shelter and housing in Toronto has continued to grow due to inadequate income supports, lack of affordable housing, increased cost of living, and additional refugee claimant arrivals. While additional shelter space, warming centers, and new housing will help many in need this winter, seasonal plans cannot fully address the increasing demand for shelter. Instead of devoting appropriate funding to ensure we have sufficient number of safe spaces for people experiencing disadvantage, Mayor Olivia Chow increased the Toronto Police Services budget by $20 million. Decreased social services and supports push people further to the margins, scrambling to find shelter wherever they can. When people can't access safe shelter in the cold of winter, unhoused people will instead go to our city's hospitals, libraries, restaurants, and TTC stations. Investments in outreach are ineffective without safe and accessible spaces for unhoused people to come indoors during all seasons of the year. As healthcare professionals and trainees, we support the Shelter, Justice, and Housing Network in calling for the Economic and Community Development Committee to, 1, ensure the safety and well-being of people living outside by immediately opening any available city-owned space to act as low-barrier, year-round, 24-hour respite centers, utilizing vacant storefronts and community centers with surge capacity for extreme weather conditions. The need for adequate shelter is year-round, not only when temperatures reach -5 degrees Celsius, including and especially in conditions of extreme heat and poor air quality. Implement a moratorium on shelter bans and encampment evictions. Immediately end the surveillance, harassment, and displacement of unhoused residents and the destruction of their survival gear. Divest from and detask policing and continue to invest in improved access to safe shelter and housing. Immediately cease the closure of shelter hotels and immediately open at least 3,000 additional non-congregate shelter spaces. And ensure safe and accessible spaces are available for marginalized people with unique needs. So that's section 1. Section 2 is meaningfully improve the conditions of city shelters by ensuring city-run facilities meet Toronto shelter standards, including ensuring infection control measures, dignified conditions, adequate accessible showers and bathrooms, proper sleep services, access to appropriate food and meals, and adequate distancing between beds to promote safer conditions. 3, respect the rights of shelter workers by ensuring staff have the resources and tools they need to perform their work and build relationships effectively, including wages and compensation, benefits and supportive conditions, and appropriate training, including anti-oppressive and trauma-informed de-escalation training, and we're happy to see this in the proposed plan today. 4, guarantee the rights and well-being of people with disabilities by engaging in meaningful consultation with physically disabled unhoused service users to conduct an accessibility audit, ensuring that shelters and respite centers are physically accessible and follow principles of universal design, and finally, ensuring people with disabilities have access to accessible shelters and respites.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the deputant? So that is the end of our list. Councillor
Can we just vary the list? I think a couple of people tried to get on, didn't hear that it was closed. How many attempted that?
So would you like to ask if we can vary the procedure?
Yes,
and,
please, yeah.
All in favor?
We dropped somebody, so if there's somebody else there, let's just do that.
Okay, the committee will allow for on this item to vary the procedure. Is there anyone here who was trying to get on the list and was unable to? Go ahead and then please register, say your name, and then we'll register you with the clerk.
Yeah, I think I'm done.
Not you, you've already heard from you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor. Bruce Davis. I'm with a company called Public Progress, and we work with municipalities and nonprofit agencies across the entire housing predicament, from emergency housing, respite sites, shelters, through to affordable housing, supportive housing, transitional housing. I don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to, first of all, thank you. Recommendation 4, supporting the churches and ethnocultural organizations that have come forward and supported. I was here actually a year ago, and I tried to make the case that it was better to fund those groups at $50 a night than it was to spend $250 a night. So I wanted to thank you for that. I noticed the money goes to December 31st, and hopefully there'll be an ongoing program. The second thing, the real reason why I wanted to step up is recommendation 9 from the CAMH report seems to have fallen through the cracks. And when it gets cold, and when you're turning people away every night, there's a temptation to say, just put the beds a little closer together. There's a temptation to say, you can accommodate 100, well, now you can accommodate 105. And I think part of the issue that compounds the safety issue is when people are desperate, anxious, hungry, scared, and we tell them to sleep 1 foot closer to the person beside them. The reason I wanted to raise this is because I believe personally we need 20 more shelters, and we need dozens more rapid housing sites. So I hope that the issue of overcrowding is not overlooked. And I know your staff come to you every year with the capital plan, which is very, very good, and I support it. But the whole issue last year when we faced this, and staff said, you know, just move the beds a little closer together. I think that compounds your safety issue, and I'm concerned about it. So those are the only two things that I wanted to raise. You're super busy. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I personally believe every village in Toronto has 35 villages. Every village in Toronto should have its own shelter. I believe community members who live there should support it and champion it, and they should volunteer to help out. We've created this weird world where people are fighting these. It's asinine. We need people to volunteer. We need people to come and do a little Christmas party. We need people to come in and run trivia nights. We need people from the neighborhood to embrace these facilities.
Please wrap up for.
That's where I'm going with this. I think our shelters would be a hell of a lot safer, better for everyone if we could get the community involved. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? I have a question. You've described a situation in which every village within the city would have a shelter and where people would be welcoming. In your experience, despite opposition at the beginning and fears at the beginning, have you seen a situation in which a community has arrived at that, or have you seen a situation in which a community just decided to consider that people who are unhoused are part of other neighbors?
Councillor, I was involved with the opening of 4 respite sites. This is in 2016. Liberty Village was one of them. I remember we took the mayor, then mayor, on a visit of the respite site at Liberty Village. We were just setting it up, and there were a bunch of people in the corner decorating a tree and bringing in all kinds of gifts, and the mayor at the time said to me, "Who are these folks?" And I said, "Those are people from adjacent buildings in Liberty Village, from the condo associations, who came in to set up a Christmas tree, and they're bringing gifts." And the mayor at the time said, "I thought people were fighting this." I said, "No, absolutely not. People want this to be successful." Another one at 541 Lakeshore, which is the old building on Lakeshore. It's been repurposed as a respite site. I remember we got neighbors from the condo associations to come in and do a trivia night, to come in and do a dance. This is back a few years ago, but it is absolutely possible. And I think, frankly, shelter operators and the city, when they operate these, they need to build in that community component rather than setting up a moat. You don't want to set up a moat around these things. You want the neighbors in helping. And frankly, you want folks who are in the shelter in the community doing good things and going to church and participating. So I think we should think of these shelters as an asset, and the community should want them to be successful.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any other people here wishing to speak on this item as we've opened it up? Nope. Thanks very much. Questions of staff? Councillor Moyse, questions of staff.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Speaker, or Chair. What kind of consultation did you undertake with frontline staff around their safety? And what safety measures currently exist for staff?
Through the chair to you, Councillor, thanks for the question. So there was some comprehensive engagement that happened with respect to the CAMH shelter study in the first place. You know, focus groups, individual surveys with shelter workers. What we've done with the Shelter Safety Action Plan is base it on the recommendations from the CAMH shelter study. So engagement with our shelter providers through the Toronto Shelter Network happened. But it's going to be very important as we implement the action plan to continue that engagement through our joint occupational health and safety committees and staff planning.
But my question is specific to our staff, though. Did you consult with them, our shelter staff?
With our shelter staff through the CAMH shelter study, yes.
Okay.
Not so much in the development of the action plan, and I think there's some feedback that, you know, we could do better in that regard, and we're committed to doing so as we implement the plan.
And also, too, how do you ensure a trauma-informed response for staff?
So I think it's very important, and thanks for the question, is as we onboard many more people into this work, is that, there's dedicated training that happens before they, are put into the front lines and are delivering service. And it's important that training is kept up to date over time as we go forward as well. So a trauma-informed focus is something that, we're very focused on delivering for our frontline staff. And we may need to reassess some of the other standard training that they take so we can focus primarily on that trauma-informed approach.
Okay. And one final question. What steps are you taking or will take to implement this action plan in collaboration with frontline staff?
Yeah, through the chair to you, Councillor, I think it is through those channels that exist in the workplace, through our joint occupational health and safety committees. With Local 79, we have a quarterly workplace violence committee. I think that would be a table that we could engage in the implementation plan discussions as well, as well as through staff meetings and other venues available to us.
Okay. And to shift a little bit, so I'm happy to see that the churches are being reimbursed up to the end of 2023, but we saw what important role they played in actually helping us deal with, the crisis we're faced when it comes to underhoused people. And I think some are willing to continue the work if they continue to receive support from the city. So do you envision that going forward, that may be a partnership that we can continue to foster and help them to help our citizens?
Through the chair to you, Councillor, we're in touch with many of the groups that participated in 2023 and continue conversations in terms of the best way they can support still people who are arriving in Toronto with their settlement needs. And we're also looking to expand the number of smaller refugee house types of facilities that can be well integrated in the community and support people to get a good start as they arrive. So those conversations continue. We look for opportunities.
Because in your own report that was tabled earlier this year, it shows that even though we have increased our shelter beds, there's still a gap in that there's just still people who will not be housed every night. And we know this, but I haven't seen a plan to close that gap. And this is why I'm asking about the churches helping us to fill that gap. So again, do we have a plan in place to going forward to work with those churches? Because I don't see it here.
So through the chair, you Councillor, not in this report. I'd say those conversations continue. We've had some planning sessions with the refugee sector to see how we can build capacity to meet the various needs, and faith groups in the city play an important role. Our current plan with respect to closing that gap is our homeless services capital infrastructure strategy that will see 20 new shelters open in this city over the next 10 years, allowing us to close some of the bigger sites, and there could be opportunities in that work to support new shelter providers in the delivery of those services for either refugee claimants or non-refugee claimants.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? I have some questions. Just regarding the case management, or if we could get there, a care management approach to support people with complex needs who live outdoors. What are the services that are currently provided, and are these resources to match the existing needs? I mean, we'd love to be in a situation where shelter's provided to everyone who needs it, but some people need additional supports. And ideally, the shelter is a place where we connect people to those supports. And I'm thinking particularly around their health and meeting them in crisis. So what is existing right now that shelter staff and all the internal supports can connect to on the outside?
Yeah, so through you, Chair Bravo, Beyond our Streets to Homes outreach teams that do street outreach, there are two programs that provide a specialized service. So one is our multidisciplinary outreach team. It's housed by Loft Community Services and supported by the Inner City Health Associates. So 2 psychiatrists, nursing staff, and 5 case managers that our outreach teams would refer people to for that specialized support. They visit encampments and other outdoor spaces to connect with people. So far this year, they've housed 29 individuals that have complex needs in supportive housing. The other team is a team that sits with the Inner City Health Associates, a mobile team promoting access to primary care led by a physician and 2 nurses, again, out in the encampments and other public spaces. And so those are the 2 groups we met with over the course of this summer to evaluate if they have the resources they need to continue that work. We're satisfied currently that they do, but that's an ongoing conversation with them in terms of the supports that they need.
My question is, so there are situations in which the care that we can provide within shelters goes into healthcare. What does that exist on the outside? Do you find situations in which, for example, a person who is no longer safe to stay in the shelter and needs supports for whatever situation they're in, what's out there for them right now? I'm concerned about does the caseworker on the shelter side have a caseworker to match with on the healthcare side, which is not a municipal responsibility, but is still needed?
Yeah, through you, Chair Bravo, no. I mean, frankly, there's still big gaps in the healthcare system with respect to places where someone could go that's in immediate crisis, whether it might be a safe bed or some other location where they could seek some respite outside of the shelter system or outside or off the street. And so there's certainly more investments that are needed in those services.
And I'm thinking, the deputants highlighted, and I think we're all very concerned about the ongoing impact of on the city and on our residents, particularly within the shelter system and those who are currently not housed within the shelter system but are unhoused, are not sheltered under the shelter system. Of the Ontario government's forced closure of supervised consumption services, and the failure to deliver on immediately in the interim on the promises that they've made about additional mental health and addictions treatment services, like what do you? How critical is this to us right now? What do you foresee coming? I know we've had in other municipalities a lot of pressure in a lot of other associated systems like emergency medical services and yeah.
So through you, Chair Bravo, we're very concerned about the changes and the legislation that will close life-saving services for people that use substances in the city. We've yet to see what new heart hubs will be and where they will be located, how they will operate, and what the scope of services they will provide. If these life-saving services are not available in the healthcare system, we fear more people will move outdoors into public spaces to use substances and be at greater risk for overdose and death.
Yeah, and of course, they've prohibited the harm reduction pieces, which we need. So in relation to what's before us, can you describe in more detail how the learnings and the research that's been done, the speaking to staff and residents, and how's this going to inform the plan around infrastructure building and the development of the 20 new shelters and those shelters that are immediately being announced in the immediate future of 6 new shelters in the short term? How will these be integrated into the implementation of the plan?
So through you, Chair Bravo, we have developed shelter design guidelines that will dictate how we build these new facilities, and so capital infrastructure will be designed with safety in mind. We'll be building smaller shelters that will integrate in a better way into communities. They'll have community spaces within them to embrace members of local neighborhoods that want to get involved in the delivery of services and understanding what happens within a shelter and who is there. And so it provides us a great opportunity to move away from some of the larger shelter hotels that we brought on over the course of the pandemic and build out these assets in communities right across the city of Toronto.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Fletcher? Oh, okay. All right, now we're going to speakers on this item. Councillor Moise.
I just want to take this opportunity to thank staff for this report and the work that goes into it. But I also want to thank our frontline staff who are doing the heavy lifting. This is not easy work at all. And I do hope that we continue to engage our frontline staff and support them so that they could, do the work well. But I recognize they too need support, and there's a lot of trauma involved in this work, regarding our staff. So just be mindful of that. We're still coming off of COVID. There's a lot of stresses, just in general, in all departments. I experienced it in public health as well. I'm sure you experience it here in shelter support services and in other city departments. So just it's our job as, elected officials, as senior team, to make sure that our people are taken care of. In regards to the churches, again, I've had the opportunity to speak to many of them, and they were happy to step forward and assist where needed. But it was difficult, right? We actually they had to kind of twist our arm and kind of embarrass us at some points. And then we came after the fact to kind of reimburse and backtrack and apologize and all these other things. But there's a willingness on their parts to continue to assist us in this work. And I think we have to proactively engage them and ask them what we can do for them to help them do this work as well. Because I feel that we do need them. It's a partnership. So I just encourage staff to continue the dialogue. And thank you for this report, and I'll keep an eye on it.
Thank you, Councillor. I also would like to, first of all, thank all the deputants that joined us today. Those who challenge us to do more. I want to start by recognizing that we know that not enough is being done, and that we're here because we don't have the housing that meets the needs that people have and housing that people can afford. And this is the original problem here. The shelter system is intended to be a step into a home, a transition. It's a place that should be the backup, not the default. And while we want to make them better, it's horrifying to see what's happening, not just in the city, but across this country. There's no community that is untouched by this problem, no matter how small. There are communities of 10,000 people with hundreds of people who are currently unhoused. And so, of course, the scale of the challenge is significant here in the city of Toronto, which has by far the largest shelter system in the entire country. I want to recognize the leadership of the shelter division and the boldness of contracting and making the relationship with CAMH to look at the problem. The dual problem, the safety of residents and the safety and the conditions of residents and the safety and conditions of the workers. The prevalence of abuse or even violence that is particularly directed at racialized people, Indigenous people, Black people, and people who are LGBTQ plus is something that we really need to think about. care work in general is hugely under stress in the city of Toronto and in this country, whether it's in childcare or elder care, and certainly in and caring within the shelter system. So it's really important that we attend to this, that there's continual conversations with the workers on the front lines, and with the residents in the shelters who understand the situation well and need to be part of the solution. There's a lot going on in this report. It just shows the range of work that this division does. We're talking about shelter safety, support for refugee claimants, outreach for people living outside in encampments, and so much more. I think that it's indicative of how this is, to me, the biggest human emergency that we're facing in the city of Toronto, and we need to treat it that way. I think it's really crucial to, and it's appreciated for people to come here and say that we need to adopt this plan. We need to stick to it because we do need to build out the shelter system in a way that's responsive to people's needs. So I hear from people who say, and including in my ward, shelters are unsafe. I don't want them in my neighborhood. But at the same time, I don't want an encampment in my neighborhood. And I think that we have to remember that we have an obligation to people to bring them inside and to give them the supports that they need. The idea of it's an indivisible idea that we make shelters safer for people, whether workers or residents. That's community safety. That's a massive intervention in community safety that people deserve. We need to build out this capital plan. We need to make sure that the first 6 shelters that are proposed are underway, are built with supportive community so that we can have the embrace that one of the deputants talked about. These are our neighbors, and I view the people who will occupy any future shelter as constituents of ours, that need the attention that any other constituent might need. And I think that when we are united in that view, then we can have a more credible voice in relation to the provincial and federal governments who need to step forward on the housing side, on the supportive housing side, on the healthcare side, and on the income side, because we have a lot of people who are unable to afford a place to live on social assistance or on ODSP, and people that are working who can't afford a place to live. And at the same time, we need to be united in that call. So I congratulate the staff for the report. I appreciate the calls from the members of the public and advocates to do more, because we have to continue to challenge ourselves to do that, while saying that I know that this isn't enough to solve the problem. I do think that we're making important strides here that are based in care, are based in understanding that people have inherent rights and value no matter who they are, and whether they have a home or not. And that we're going to continue to strive to meet the needs that people have, meet them where they are, and provide the supports that they require. So thanks. Any other speakers? No. On the item, all in favor? That is carried.
Madam Speaker, Chair, I'm going to need a 5-minute recess because I'm going to go now to my office and work from there.
So thank you, Councillor Fletcher. 5-minute recess so she can continue to join us online. Thank you, everyone. Our recess is over. I have to go back to Dawn first. Yes. Okay. So we're going back.
Just give us a second.
No. Can everyone stop? Can you hear me? Put up your hand if you can hear me. All right. Put up your hand if you can hear me. Thank you. We're going to get started. I don't want to use the gavel, y'all.
Use it.
Okay, so before we go to the next item, EC 17.5, apologies to staff, we are going to go back to 17.3 because we have our speaker here now, and we're going to hear from our speaker and then come back to 17.5, okay? So Dawn Sutherland? Online?
Bonjour, Annie.
Yes,
My name
thank
is
you.
Dawn.
Go ahead, you have 3 minutes.
Miigwech. Bonjour, my name is Dawn Sutherland. My spirit name is Anong Wiskani Kwi, which means Starflower Woman. I am the executive director of Ondion, which is an Indigenous violence against women shelter, and additionally we have transitional housing. I'm here to speak in regards to the Indigenous funding framework, of which I participated as a member of TASK. This funding, I think, is incredibly important because traditionally, Indigenous organizations, we've had to fit into a very structured process and laborious in which there are lines for things like staffing or particular items, but there's never room for things like land-based knowledge or for cultural teachings. So often we had to fit ourselves into these boxes of very specific ideas and then somehow try and make ourselves appealing enough to receive the funding. With the Indigenous funding framework, we have more flexibility in which to do that. And I know that there have been some concerns, and in a newspaper whose name I will not mention, did an article referring to a lack of accountability they felt. And I will stress that there is accountability in how we've been dealing with this funding. We do account for how we spend it, and it's done in a responsible way that best address the needs of our community, but does not fit us into a box. Traditionally, we have been underfunded, often due to population size, sometimes due to a lack of information provided to us. And by using this framework and the money flowing through TASK, we were able to address some of those inconsistencies. Truth and reconciliation is something that we hear about a lot. And I think for me, truth is very important, but reconciliation looks different in very many ways. And it can be as simple as small acts that we do as people to acknowledge the lands that we're on and to learn about Indigenous community. But it's also what I consider to be very large things like the funding framework, which helps us be able to provide for our very vulnerable community in a way that is culturally and spiritually relevant, which in the long run just builds better relationships between those of us who are Indigenous and those who are not. This funding for my organization has gone to cultural teachings. It has gone to supporting the mental health of our community members, which is incredibly important, and to building a better relationship with the city, which is incredibly important. How the city, their relationship with our community has not always been good, but this has been an incredibly positive step moving forward. I would like to take the opportunity also to thank the Community Funding Unit for all the work that they did in regards to this. It is my hope that this will become a new framework for how Indigenous organizations receive funding, not just within the city, but within other foundations. Miigwech.
Thank you so much. And we have to adopt the item, right? On the item, all in favor? On the item, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you. With the indulgence of our Children's Services staff, we are going to go back to EC 17.1, Ombudsman Toronto Housing Unit Status Report. There were no questions, but I want to see if there are any other speakers. Councillor Fletcher to
Chair.
speak.
Pardon?
Just go ahead, Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you. I understand you have a motion, and thank you for showing it to me. I think from when we had many reports on the Housing Commissioner model here at City Hall, and I think it was 2016 or 17 when it was first floated as an important function to assist in the delivery of affordable housing, ensure it's delivered fairly, and all of the many things that we've talked about, be able to assist staff and review. I'll only think about our access situation, digital issues that come up regularly now in the digital age, and how to make sure everybody can be part of that ahead of making decisions as part of the decision-making process. So in 19, there was a frame for 2019 when we first agreed, there was a frame for the Housing Commissioner. And then in 2022, we actually seem to have shifted a little bit for the frame for the Housing Commissioner, one to do investigations. So I really support your motion, Councillor Bravo, because we need to determine just what is that role of the Housing Commissioner, where does it best sit, and what we want from that role. Is it investigations that might be important? Is it reviews? Is it trends? Is it best practice throughout the world that we can access to make better decisions here in the city? In other words, do you front end load it or do you back end load it? The staff do everything and then there's an investigation into how it worked out. If it didn't work out, if it did work out, usually it didn't work out. Or is it ahead of time? And this is the best practice, particularly in the digital age. So I can't speak after you make your motion, but I'm speaking ahead of it, that I think it's really nested in one place. Is that the right place still? We got the year report from the Ombudsman, and it is very investigative heavy. So that brought this up to my mind, and I think into yours. So I will certainly support this direction of your motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? So I do, first of all, have a motion to move coming from the Housing Rights Advisory Committee, requesting the Deputy Ombudsman, that City Council requests the Deputy Ombudsman to provide updates on the Ombudsman's Toronto Housing Units Housing Rights Framework at each Housing Rights Advisory Committee meeting in 2025. The second motion refers to what Councillor Fletcher has just spoken to, and it is essentially that it's a request for the city manager to report to executive on the original functions that were set out in 2019 with respect to areas that are not necessarily attended to in the Ombudsman's report, which, as Councillor Fletcher says, has taken on important investigations. This is really referring to functions of the Housing Commissioner as they were initially envisioned, and which were set out in the Maitre-Crane report of 2022, in which a commissioner would review and assess the systemic issues and hurdles for the implementation of the obligations that the city has taken on itself through the Toronto Housing Charter and our Housing TO plan going to 2030. Provide expertise on housing as a human right, which is as yet a very unsettled question. So what does that look like? What's the baseline? What are the definitions? Making recommendations to City Council around these pieces and providing advice to the public service at various levels, to city manager, deputy city managers, and relevant divisions. While my motion doesn't indicate a way forward in particular, but we do want to examine how these unfulfilled functions could be fulfilled, because as we looked at in the previous item, the lack of progress on housing and affordable housing is a systemic question that it has an important player as the municipal government, but it does intersect obviously with the provincial and federal governments. There's context, there's funding relationships, and that we want to make sure that in every way We're aligning across divisions, across initiatives to make sure that we're fulfilling these pieces, and that the question of housing as a human right is very important in how we investigate how programs have been administered and how policies are developed. But it also has to do with how we build out what we have. So Councillor Fletcher has talked about front-end loading. So do we look at everything through this lens and make sure that we're complying with our obligations as we've adopted in council decisions? And then on the other end, this is the investigation. Once you've already made the mistake, then you kind of face the consequences. And I think at this moment in time, given what Toronto and is facing, we need to make sure that every step that we take, every dollar that we invest, every policy that we make, every program that we initiate is actually bringing us forward. And that way we can hold ourselves accountable and make sure that where there is a systemic barrier, a culture barrier within the organization, or any kind of gaps that exist, that we're attending to these with every energy that we have so that we can resolve the biggest problems that we face right now. So on that—
I just have a question on your motion, Chair.
Oh, yes, Councillor.
I'm just interested in how motions come from the Housing Accessibility Committee to City Council. Is there a pathway for that?
I'm not sure. I think that's the Housing Rights Advisory is an advisory committee. So
correct. So it has to report somewhere, and those motions would have to come in to a clerk.
Yes, but they go. The clerk has informed me that it depends on what the substance of the motion is. For example, this one, we referred this report to the Housing Rights Advisory Committee, so they have now made the request through us. Yeah, and then it could go to another, for example, to Planning and Housing, depending on the substance of the motion.
Okay, thank you. And is there an agreement that, anyway, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. On the motions, on motion 1 from the Housing Rights Advisory Committee, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. On the second motion, on the request to the city manager for report, all in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you. All right. Patiently waiting. EC 17.5. Implementation of the Canada-wide early learning and childcare system and 2025 to 2029 childcare and early years service plan update. We have a presentation from Children's Services. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves and to get started. Thanks.
Good. Thank you. Good morning, Councillor Bravo, Councillor Moyes, Councillor Fletcher. This morning, we're happy to do a presentation to provide an update on the Canada-wide early learning system, also commonly referred to as the $10 a day childcare. I want to introduce my colleague, Una Kim, beside me, who has been working on this program since its inception through many iterations and ups and downs. She's going to share the presentation with you today, and then we're happy to take questions. And for those who may not know me, I'm Shanley McNamee, General Manager, Children's Services. So over to you, Una. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shanley. Thank you to the chair and to the committee for your time today. I'm happy to be presenting to you. Oh, can you hear? Can speak up a little bit closer? Good? Okay, thank you. So just to give you a quick overview of what I'll be speaking to today, so we'll be doing a quick highlight of the staff report that we submitted, specifically providing an update and overview on the implementation of the Canada-wide and early learning system in Toronto. We'll provide a review of the provincial guidance and funding formula that was just recently announced in August, as well share with some brief updates on the development of the 2025 and 2029 childcare and early years service plan. So just to start us off, I wanted to give a brief refresher on the policy context that we're working in. So in March 2022, the province and the federal government signed the Ontario Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Agreement. And the aim of this agreement is to reduce the cost of childcare for children aged 0 to 5 to an average of $10 a day by 2026. To date, fees have been reduced by up to 52.75% for eligible families. To support the implementation of the Canada-wide system in Toronto, Children's Services has developed and is implementing a directed growth plan to support the childcare space expansion goals. So in August 2024, the province released the long-awaited Canada-wide funding formula. The cost-based formula is for programs in Canada-wide serving children aged 0 to 5 and represents a move from the revenue replacement model that was in place since 2022 to a cost-based approach that is based on the province's calculation of the typical costs of delivering childcare. So the image on the screen here shows a visual of how the funding formula, the new formula works and the basic components of a licensee's Canada-wide funding allocation. So starting on the left, we see that we have the cost-based funding allocation, that is the amount that a licensee would receive, is equal to a program cost allocation plus an allocation in lieu of profit and surplus minus a base fee revenue offset. The program cost allocation consists of a benchmark allocation and a top-up allocation, which are the legacy top-up for 2025 only, a rolling top-up, or a growth top-up. This new approach will allow for greater flexibility among operators, as funding reconciliations will be completed at the licensee level rather than on a line-by-line basis. The new funding formula also includes a regional component that recognizes that costs vary for operators across the province. So this adjustment is implemented using a geographic adjustment factor that's applied to the benchmark allocation and is calculated for each licensee. The geographic adjustment factor for Toronto is 1.07, or an increase by 7%. There's, of course, a lot more details to the funding formula, which can be found in our staff report or in the ministry guidelines, which we've hyperlinked to the appendix of this report. As part of the same memo that released the new funding formula, the province also announced several program changes that will come into effect on January 1st, 2025. First, fees will be capped at $22 per day for eligible families attending a Canada-wide enrolled center. Second, federal and provincial funding will only be available to Canada-wide enrolled licensees or non-Canada-wide licensees that only serve children aged 6 to 12. This includes general operating funding, wage enhancement grants, and fee subsidy funding. Third, local priorities funding will continue to address fee subsidies, programming for children aged 6 to 12, professional learning, and resources for families with extra support needs. And fourth, there will be additional financial accountability measures to support the responsible use of public funds. This includes standardized financial reporting, cost and eligibility reviews by service system managers, and third-party compliance assessments for the top 5% of childcare centers or agencies exceeding the benchmark allocation. So while we've received some new information about the funding formula, there are still some pieces that we are waiting for, including the remaining funding guidelines, further details around the workforce strategy, and confirmation of our final funding allocation. Understandably, there are many questions that we are hearing from the sector. And we just wanted to take a moment on this slide to try to clarify some of those concerns. So as you can see on the left side of this slide, we've heard a concern that funding has been frozen since 2022 and the new formula does not account for increased costs. There's also a concern that the new model places restrictions on how much staff can be paid. An idea that the approach means more government oversight and less independence for operators, and that the new cost-based approach will result in less funding, resulting in room closures or reduced service. We wanted to address some of these concerns. What we do know about the province's new funding approach is that the formula allows for scaling factors and changes to operational plans to account for year-over-year changes. The formula includes a wage floor and does not limit wages within benchmark allocations. While there are new accountability measures, provided the significant injection of public funds, these measures will support the responsible use of public dollars. With this, even with this, the new approach grants licensees the flexibility to use their allocation as needed on eligible costs. And the fourth item here on the right, by design, the province estimates that approximately 50% of licensees will be sufficiently funded through the provincial benchmarks. These operators may also have funding room to incur additional eligible costs to increase wages or improve quality. The 50% of licensees with cost structures that exceed the benchmarks will be supported with top-up funding. So again, as I mentioned, though we are awaiting additional details, we do have a sense of what the implications of the recent provincial announcements might be. First, as mentioned, the new cost-based funding formula is designed to increase standardization while allowing for more flexibility for operators. However, the funding formula does not include any capital funding to support growth. This is especially challenging for the not-for-profit sector, where barriers to capital financing are higher. In the third box here, you can see that the new funding formula also does not build in a formalized wage grid or standardized benefits plan. And I should note that Children's Services and City Council have made requests of the ministry to develop workforce strategy that supports recruitment and retention of staff in the early years and childcare sector, which is critical for the current and future expansion of a high quality and childcare system. Lastly, with the increase in demand for affordable spaces, there is a growing concern that families in receipt of fee subsidy may experience reduced access to affordable care. So while these changes with the Canada-wide system are happening, Children's Services staff have been working very hard to develop the 2025 to 29 Childcare and Early Years Service Plan for Toronto. Service plans are a way for us to respond to community needs and articulate a vision for the key priorities of the sector. And in fact, Children's Services has a long history of service planning, having produced plans prior to amalgamation. In developing the service plan, our core driving principle is to center the needs of families and children. And we do this through community engagement, including consulting with parents and caregivers, Indigenous partners, and a broad range of sector stakeholders. As you can see on this slide, that we've connected so far with over 4,000 people through a combination of surveys, focus groups, and workshops. We've also worked to reach out to Indigenous families and community leaders in the early years and childcare sector. We had the honor of speaking with Indigenous families and caretakers through a focus group, and also have had conversations with the Aboriginal Advisory and Planning Committee to seek guidance on how we can use the service plan to advance self-determination in the sector. As a result of our research and consultation conducted to date, the emerging areas of focus are listed here on the slide. So very briefly, what we've heard is that there is a need to support a thriving workforce, expand and sustain high-quality childcare and early years services, improve equitable access to services, prioritize inclusion for children, families, and staff, connect families with essential family supports, and advance self-determination for Indigenous organizations and families. In terms of next steps, staff will continue to pull together and analyze the consultation data and identify actions with an aim of bringing the service plan to council in 2025. We also hope to organize another roundtable in 2025 where we can provide another update on the service plan, the funding formula, and other important issues facing the sector. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you for the excellent presentation. Appreciate the graphics. I think we might have a couple of questions, so we're going to ask you to hang on, but we have some speakers to go to. The first speaker is Peter Vermusa, and followed by Sultana Jahangir. Welcome to committee. You have 3 minutes.
Madam Chair and councillors, my name is Peter Warmuza. As a way of background, I have spent over 25 years with the City Children's Services, primarily in charge of service planning, budgets, and information systems. After retiring, I earned a PhD from University of Toronto, specializing in early learning and childcare. My research focuses on issues of equitable access to quality childcare and how neighborhoods affect childcare quality. Since 2014, low-income families are being increasingly crowded out of licensed childcare spaces. In order to avoid further widening of the equity gap, the following actions are immediately required, even before the fees are decreasing to $22 a day next January. The Council should mandate that all programs benefiting from public funding must be accountable for program quality through annual quality assessment, that all programs benefiting from public funding must accept subsidized children, that subsidized families must have a priority for admission to municipally operated programs, and a minimum percentage of spaces in every community program shall be guaranteed for access by children from low-income families. These measures should come into place as soon as possible. Waiting for the scheduled late February ECDC meeting or even another roundtable later in the spring will not only make things worse, but we also will have knock-on effects on cities' poverty reduction strategy, demand for housing subsidies, a potential demand for social assistance and other supports. The same urgency for action applies to the second issue I wish to bring forward. As early as the spring of 2025, we could have in place a new government whose policy position is the abolishment of the $10 childcare program and a reintroduction of direct funding of all families similar to the Harper government's universal childcare benefit. I am recommended that city constitutes an internal task force with participation from human services, economic development and culture and finance divisions with a mandate to address the impact of the likely cancellation of CLAWC. The task force should consider all negative impacts of cancellations for children and their families, service providers, neighborhoods, and local businesses. It also should consider the probability of having to increase funding for childcare subsidies, social assistance costs, pressures for affordable housing, and other social supports. This analysis should be shared with other municipalities, elected representatives, and community at large. Finally, because planning is as much for bad weather as good, it is important that the city staff develop contingency plans at the earliest opportunity. Waiting until the emergency actually happens will be too late for any meaningful action.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation. Is Sultana Jahangir? She's online. Welcome to committee. You have 3 minutes.
Do you hear me?
Yes, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bravo, to give me an opportunity to talk. My name is Sultana Jahangir. I'm from South Asian Women's Rights Organization. We are a community, women-led community-based organization founded by immigrant women living in the Oak Ridge, Taylor, Massey, and surrounding East Danforth neighborhood. We have been long advocate for full funding universal childcare for low-income and no-income parents. All children have the right to early learning and healthy development regardless of their mother's employment status, income, immigration status, neighborhood, and any other factor. The announcement of CWELCC was important for many low-income and no-income parents and caregivers. Lack of access to childcare is a significant barrier to employment for many mothers, and result is inequitable access to early learning and quality childcare for their children. We are excited to see the trajectory of change, which we welcome this long overdue strategy and its benefit. We continue to be left behind. First, there is a space crisis in the community. We live and work in Scarborough, Etobicoke, and other similar areas are considered childcare desert, yet have little to no space, and not many school-based childcare are being cancelled. So the city's previous target to create childcare space for 50% of Toronto child population excluded our communities, and this exclusion is continuing by both the Ontario government and city. Second, there is a lack of and action to secure and expand childcare subsidies for low-income and no-income mothers. The current average rate $22 a day and eventually $10 a day is still too much for precariously employed low and no-income parents and caregivers. Federal, provincial governments, nor the city did not earmark any fund to secure childcare subsidy. This will continue to exclude and harm community. Lastly, childcare workers continue to experience precarious employment arrangement. ECE, ECA, and other staffs are integral to the early development of our children, yet are facing substandard work conditions such as low wage, chaotic scheduling, the prevalence of temporary help agency misclassification as contractors, and challenges in accessing work-related benefits. On this occasion, my community member urged advocates, elected representatives, and policymakers to not leave us behind again. We cannot afford to be excluded. We demand increased childcare spaces target to meet at least 85% of the Toronto child population. These spaces must be public, school-based, community-based, and non-profit to ensure quality and accessible care, and allocations must prioritize in underserved and high-needs community. Ensure immediate full funding for childcare subsidy for no and low-income women, and revise eligibility to accommodate parents with precarious immigration status and employment status. Implement public standards of employment and labor practices to protect all childcare workers. This including ending the use for for-profit staffing agency, provincial city pay grid that start for the living wage, public accessible training, and dignified worker condition. I'll conclude my repeating our demand to not to left behind us again. We must recognize the right to dignity and security for one in order to guarantee the security for all.
Thank you.
And every children deserve quality childcare, and every mother deserves the childcare space.
Thank you for your deputation. The next deputant is Donna Spreitzer, Toronto Child Care Advocates. Is Donna online? Yeah. Welcome to committee. You have 3 minutes.
Toronto Child Care Advocates has submitted a comprehensive 5-page document to this committee. It includes TCCA's support for the 3 motions. I urge you to read TCCA's submission and consider the additional recommendations. My name is Donna Spreitzer, and I'm here today to tell you that the child care community needs more aggressive action from the city to defend CWELC and help drive its success. We are concerned that in the current political environment, $10 a day childcare is at risk. We recognize the province and the feds have the fiscal capacity to do more, but the city has always been a system manager and funder, historically to the tune of 20%. We are therefore calling on the city to do its fair share. If the city wants to achieve its equity goals and address poverty and meet its targets in the provincial plan and the city's growth strategy policy, it needs to find new, innovative strategies to expand nonprofit spaces. For example, loan funds for nonprofits and directly building childcare in new housing. And of course, working towards paying childcare workers a livable wage and good benefits with the goal of achieving parity with city workers. I want to put a plug in for loans or revolving loans for nonprofit centers. I'm not sure you are aware, but it's nearly impossible for nonprofits to borrow money from a bank. When I was a child care director, it took me 10 years to convince the bank to give us a credit card. We know that capital funding is an obstacle for growth. It's in the report. If we want more childcare spaces and expansion in the nonprofit sector, we need the provincial government to release Toronto's share of the promised infrastructure money. This $625 million fund was announced by the feds in 2023 and has not yet been allocated. The community is alarmed that the actual revenue allocations for 2025 and beyond are yet unknown. For the 3rd year in a row, boards of directors are trying to budget with no assurance of the revenue stream. This is taking a serious toll on childcare operators who are dedicated, mostly women, holding the system together on a wing and a prayer. I can assure you that depending on prayer is no way to operate. Now more than ever, we depend on the city to better assist operators by providing more frequent and improved communication through e-blasts, Q&As, and town halls, where operators can get their questions answered, and to do this so all operators receive the same information to effectively navigate the system and access optimal funding. We urge the city to strengthen intergovernmental advocacy. Advocates and operators want to work with the city to make CWELC successful for families and educators alike. Thank you to the committee and Children's Services for your important work.
Thank you very much for your deputation. The next speaker is Melissa Bruno. Is Melissa online? Welcome to committee. You have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi there. Good morning. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak to both recommendations 1 and 3 from Children's Services. My name is Melissa Bruno, and I'm one of the affected parents from a for-profit daycare that has decided to pull out of the national subsidy program in the new year. I have a 3.5-year-old that goes to Sunnyside Daycare, and we received a notice on November 1st that our fees were going to go from $900 to $2,100 a month because they were pulling out of the subsidy program. We also have a daughter who was on the sibling priority list. And so for 2 kids in daycare at full tuition, it meant that we would be paying $4,700 a month. We made, major life decisions based on the budget that included a child care subsidy. And I don't know many other people who can afford an additional $1,000 to their monthly budget, let alone $4,000 a month. The reason that the operators provided to us was simply that the model wasn't working for them and that the program was too difficult for them to participate in. We found out after talking to other groups of parents that out of the 14 for-profit daycares that were opting out of the program, 7 of them were linked to the same corporate chain. So a community of parents came together. We drafted a letter with over 100 signatures to request a meeting with the ownership and ask that they provide more information and transparency in terms of why they were pulling out of the subsidy program. We applied significant media pressure. We named these owners publicly. And finally, after a few weeks, we received a 3-page non-response from the owners that essentially said no to a meeting. They did not provide further clarity in terms of why they were pulling out of the subsidy. They just reiterated their position and expressed a hope that the national subsidy program would one day increase viability and more choice in selecting childcare for parents, which I think is really interesting that they honed in on this idea of choice, since their entire business model is taking advantage of a supply and demand dynamic. These owners know that their wait list is hundreds of kids long, and they're banking on the fact that families will have no other option but to pay the fees that they set. In our particular area in the west end of Toronto, there's no space in surrounding nonprofit daycares. My son has been on the wait list for almost 4 years. Families are now scrambling to find alternative care, whether it's unlicensed daycares, nanny shares, which requires you to have adequate space in your home. We're looking at ad hoc care options with family and friends, which
Sorry,
isn't
we're
ideal.
going to have
in
to ask you to
maintaining your-
wrap up, but I can ask you a follow-up question.
Sure.
So do you want to go ahead and finish your thought? I think it's an important.
Ultimately, what's happening is people are taking out lines of credit and they're refinancing their mortgages because they don't have an option but to pay for the care, or they're going to leave the workforce altogether, which obviously comes at an economic disadvantage to the entire city. I worry that these particular owners will profit even more if the cap on for-profit centers is lifted. There obviously should be no place in our society for investors and venture capitalists to make profits in childcare settings. And so I have 3 asks for the committee members to consider today. One is that the city prevent any additional licenses that should be given to this particular corporate chain, that the city look at providing capital loans to community groups like the affected parents of these for-profit centers who want and are willing to put in the work to open a nonprofit daycare, and that the city include this particular group of affected parents in future discussions on childcare in Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your deputations. Any other questions of the deputant? We'll go to our final deputant, John Weatherup. Online? Okay. Welcome to committee. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, go ahead, please. 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name is John Weather, and I'm the president of Toronto Education Workers Local 4400. We represent about 70,000 employees across 4 school boards: Toronto District School Board, Toronto Catholic School Board, Viamont, and Bloorview. We also represent 4 childcares. We're very supportive of the report. There's a number of groups that have spoken before us on some of the changes and some questions that they put forward. I bring it from an education perspective, and how childcare now moving under the Ministry of Education and the importance that it brings to education. There's in most of the reports that come out, education is mentioned, but not highlighted on the impact of learning for children in the early years. And I know there's just one out yesterday, the future of work, empowering growth. We seem to get our minds around, bring women out of poverty, wages, those types of things. But there's little discussion on things like the Pascal report that was a number of years ago, the OECD report on the economic benefits of children in the education and the benefits of providing quality childcare. So I think we just wanted to highlight a few of those things. The other thing is when we look at these things from a poverty reduction or anti-poverty, the structure that's set up for wages that are proposed in the city of Toronto means that women predominantly working in these jobs cannot afford to live in the city of Toronto. And if they do, they're really living very close to the poverty level or below. Secondly, their pensions, normally defined contribution outside of municipalities and education, means that they're destined for a life of poverty when they retire. So as we look at these things and we talk about all the benefits, all the things that come along with it, the structure itself leads women to be in poverty for long periods of time. And I think the wage structure, in particular the pension, saying that people will be going into what they call a defined contribution plan, which runs out and pays very little pension to women. And we know as women age and retire that they're for a life of poverty. So I think just asking that if the report does deal with the integration of education, I think healthcare should be included. In the early years, we know a lot now about how the brain functions in children and how they learn. As the city and the school boards, I think it should also include Sick Kids as one of the leaders in this area, Blue Review School Authority, Autism, CHIO hospitals. There's a number that actually deliver how children learn. In closing, I just want to say, that there's better education integration, that when we talk about economic interest, we don't have a group of employees or members who are going to be destined for poverty if pensions aren't addressed. Capital funding with the TDSB and the organizing around capital funding has already been spoken of, but a better integration of how capital money is assisted. We know the school board had their capital funding.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. Sorry.
I'll just wrap up in saying that childcares in schools or where people live are the way to go. Moving it out of schools or moving it out of housing where people are is a detriment to parents and it's harmful for students, and they need to focus on having a school-based space. Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation. And now we'll go to questions of staff. Any questions? Councillor Moise, questions of staff.
So when I read through the report, it said that 0 to 5 years old is $10 a day childcare, and 6 to 12 it's $22 a day for childcare. Is that correct? Is that my understanding?
Through the chair, sorry, can you repeat the 6 to 12?
6 to 12 is $22 a day, and 0 to 5 is $10 a day?
No. So through the chair, and thank you, Councillor, for that. For children 0 to 5, effective January 1st, the fee will be $22 a day. For 6 to 12-year-olds, which are called school age, they are not part of the Canada-wide program, and those operators set their fees based on their budget and their revenue, so they are not part of that program.
Okay.
And they do not benefit from reduced fees.
Was that always the case, or is that just the...
Well, the case of the introduction of Canada-wide specifically was to provide affordability for children 0 to 5.
Okay. And in regards to recommendation 2 and 3, it says here to collaborate with and identify strategies to enhance equitable access. Has that always been done, or has that not been done in the past, or are you just starting to do that now? I mean, this is not new. And same thing with recommendation 3, saying to convene a roundtable meeting with Indigenous partners. I'm assuming that you're referring to task. But again, is this something that you're introducing now, or should that have been happening already?
Through the chair, first of all, in terms of collaborating with the childcare sector, that's not new. We do that continuously. We also, as you heard, we have a long history of service plans. This really refers to this iteration of our service plan to make sure that it reflects the changes that have happened in the sector. So that is a continuous process that we always do. And in terms of engaging, yes, with the Indigenous and other partners, again, that is something that we always do. And we really rely on that feedback through the service plan process to understand the concerns from the sector, opportunities, and that's how we build out our action plan for the next 5 years.
Okay, because, I mean, just reading it, it just says, like, for example, to convene and to collaborate. It doesn't say that it's continuing, so that was fun, a little confusing. Okay, those are my comments. Thank you. No questions.
Thank you. I do have some questions. I'll start from the question raised by one of the deputies, Melissa Bruno, regarding the lamentable situation those families have found themselves. Is it one of the requests is for the City of Toronto to deny or prevent licenses for bad actors in the profit-making business of childcare? Do we have that power? Is that possible?
Thank you, Chair. We don't have that possible. Those operators who are leaving the program, who are exiting, are now no longer going to receive any government funding. They'll be completely market-driven, independent operators. The province actually controls the licensing, so they would continue to receive a license through the province, and there are no sanctions that we can take, given they'll no longer be part of our program, nor will they be funded. But I would like to point out that that's very unfortunate for those families and a number of families. We have worked really closely with any operator who comes forward to say they want to exit the program. And by that, I mean literally convening, independent meetings, roundtable meetings, debunking those myths, which you also saw in the presentation, like, why are you leaving? Those are myths. We actually think the program operator is going to fare much better and have much greater flexibility. So we've been working with them to try to at least encourage them to stay, stay on. And if it doesn't work, fair enough. But we actually feel like this model is an improvement over the revenue replacement, which has been a real problem for operators.
Thank you. So the cost-based formula has answered some of the questions from the sector, but there's a bunch of outstanding challenges. Is it fair to say that it's capital funding, a workforce strategy, and a plan for improving access is still needed from the provincial and federal governments if we're actually going to sustain and grow the system as we need to?
Yeah, through the chair, you'll see in the report that we noted, while we're very pleased with the reduction in fees to $22 a day for parents, there is still outstanding concerns around capital. This capital program has been launched without $1 of capital funding. So that is extremely difficult to roll out anywhere in the province. And as you heard, we have not had a commitment on the infrastructure funding, which was announced almost 2 years ago. Yeah. So that is a challenge for us. The workforce, we at the City of Toronto support the workforce and would like to see the compensation improved, including salary scales and a well-planned compensation method for employees. However, the province's approach at this time is to put in place a wage floor. So there may be some opportunities through this new model for operators to reinvest money into salaries, but it's certainly not the full-on workforce plan that we have all asked for, meeting ourselves and the community.
Yeah, the workers are the care, really. So the Ontario funding formula won't provide childcare funding to centers outside of QUELC. Centers were asked to rejoin QUELC within a timeline. How many centers applied and were accepted, both profit and not-for-profit?
Through the chair, or through you, Speaker, the application or the We reached out to 75 locations in Toronto that were not participating in the program. And I'll just give you some rationale for that. These are programs that are not in Canada-wide, but they are currently receiving government funding for fee subsidies for families in some cases and compensation for staff. So if they didn't join the program, that funding is now not going to be available, meaning salaries would potentially be impacted and those families with a fee subsidy would not have care. So we reached out 75, 27 have agreed to opt in.
Yeah. Okay, so 75.
27, yeah.
27 have.
And out of those, I think you asked.
3 more questions, so as fast as possible.
Go ahead.
Based on the cost-based funding model, which uses the provincial medium to plan costs, do you anticipate that additional regional cost adjustments are going to be needed for centers in Toronto, where obviously costs are greater?
Quickly, I'll just say that Toronto did receive the highest regional adjustment across the province to recognize that costs are higher here. And in addition to the benchmark funding, there is legacy top-up funding that ensures that whatever cost structures were in place in 2023 will continue to be supported.
And will you be doing any exit interviews with centers who are leaving Qualc? I don't know if you've already answered that.
Absolutely. We've already been doing those and, in fact, trying to influence some of those operators with better information to make better decisions.
Excellent. And the last question is, the Ministry of Education canceled those 48 school board childcare projects. That means a loss of 3,000 spaces. And so saying that 115 million would be reallocated to the community in quotes. Has any of this funding been reallocated to the City of Toronto? Do we have any indications about how those funds will be dispersed to capital expansion projects?
The change in the targets for the City of Toronto, the cancellation of the projects, we have not received any information. The province resent out a sort of an application across the province to ask people how they were doing, and I suspect will realign spaces across the province. But at this point, there's been no commitment in writing that they'll continue to be in Toronto.
Thank you.
And funded.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. And now we'll go to speakers. Anyone else to speak? Okay, thanks. So I do have a motion. While it's displayed, I'll exchange that it makes some technical changes to make sure that the urgency of our requests are being received by the relevant ministers at both levels of government, federal and provincial. It also specifically names that funding from the Early Learning and Childcare Infrastructure Fund is stalled, that we need an indication of when these funds will flow to help our expansion planning in Toronto. And it identifies that the provincial government needs to step up to take a leadership role in planning growth for the province-wide system. In the last year, Toronto has made many requests, and we've reiterated our positions. I think in relation to Canada-wide early learning and childcare system, and I think it's really important to highlight that we've reiterated repeatedly our longstanding position that public funding for childcare should be prioritized in the public and not-for-profit system for the quality of care and for the sustainability of the sector. The motion also asks for those positions to be communicated to the province by our General Manager of Toronto Children's Services during any consultations in 2025 and during the provincial budget and any renewal of the Canada-Ontario Action Plan. Look, I really want to share that I'm very grateful for the advocates that have come here today. There's so much collective wisdom here about what is needed, what could be possible with different approaches, and that's very good to see. And I look forward to continuing those conversations as we reconvene the Child Care Roundtable in the new year, where we'll continue to discuss this. Childcare is fundamental to the local economy. It's fundamental to the family economy, to the livelihoods of parents, and it's a crucial intervention in child development. Every dollar that we spend in childcare is going to pay off $3, $5, $7, depending on who you ask. Children arrive at school ready to learn. It contributes to child development, means contributing to the better outcomes in terms of their performance, not just in terms of school, but also in the world. And so it's an important community development investment as well. There's a lot of work to do, obviously, to make our childcare sector sustainable, and that it grows as it's needed and where it's needed, as one of the deputants indicated. And it's clear that we need the federal and provincial government to resolve the outstanding issues related to capital funding for childcare, infrastructure, and a real plan for the workforce. I can't say enough that they need fair wages, because the quality in childcare is the workers. That's full stop. And to retain the quality workers that we need to ensure that children are receiving great care, we need to recognize that in the workforce. And of course, it's the access for families. There's nothing more desperate making than not having childcare that you can afford, and knowing that people are going into debt and leaving the workforce and being driven into poverty because of these decisions is heartbreaking. It puts the entire family at risk. Those are my remarks. So any other speakers on the motion? All in favor on the item as amended? Oh, sorry, the first motion and the second motion, all in favor? Great, thank you. Item as amended, all in favor? That's great. So we now go to EC 17.6. While we get set up for that, I'm going to ask for a 2-minute recess and then we're going to be, I'll be moving at, I think I'll move immediately with the 2-minute recess extension to finish the agenda. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. See you in 2 minutes. Okay, everyone, the 2 minutes is up. We're going to continue with the agenda. I'm going to ask everyone to take your seats and have your conversations outside, please. We need to finish this agenda. The next item is EC 17.6, an approach to support naturally occurring retirement communities, NORCs in Toronto. I'm going to ask staff to please take your conversations outside. Thank you. We have a speaker, Bill Lohman, online. Welcome to committee. You have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Economic and Community Development Committee. Thank you for this opportunity to offer a tenant perspective on this NORC proposal. My name is Bill Lohman. I am a member of the STAC, a NORC alumni and ambassador, and a member of the North Toronto Neighborhood Care Team Working Group. The NORC Innovation Centers did an article on the home care model to better enable seniors to age in place safely and independently. And I agree with the research finding that supports this citywide approach for an aging in place that to be included in the third senior strategy. And our collaborative effort at the building level to organize and coordinate the delivery of stakeholder services, to individuals in the community is very similar. And our bi-monthly Bathurst Roundtable is a communication platform for stakeholders to identify their problems, concerns, explore ideas, and find meaningful solutions to facilitate the services and supports to the tenants. We've identified some things that, there's certainly a need for better interdepartmental communication. There's issues around privacy constraints. There's a need for more hands-on staffing to provide healthcare services. And the senior housing would benefit from an increase in the budget that would allow for things like ADO for all the apartment doors in these senior buildings. And there's a need for more frontline staff to fill in the skeleton staffing model to increase the presence and the tenant support with having staff available. And an increase in the funding for tenant-led activities, and especially initiatives to inspire more volunteer activity and leadership building in the community. But there's a question here with the 3.0, and there seems to be an unstated vision that the 83 senior buildings will be the point of delivery for the healthcare and recreation services for the senior population across the city. So I kind of ask, why isn't there a representative voice for the needs of these 15,000 senior tenants recognized in the senior strategy? And will this senior strategy acknowledge that the Toronto senior housing tenants are an equity-deserving stakeholder in the senior strategy 3.0 and are deserving of voice?
Thank you. I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your deputation. Are there any questions of staff on this item? Speakers, I have a motion. I want to recognize that the initial request for this report came from Councillors Matlow and Crisanti, and I've been asked by Councillor Matlow to move this motion that we refer the item to the General Manager of Senior Services and Long-Term Care to report to the April 8th, 2025 meeting of Economic and Community Development Committee on the recommendations in the original MM 13.13 motion. Any questions of the mover? No. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And now we're at our final item. EC 17.7, Night Economy Working Group update. And we have deputations. The first deputant is Harris Rosen. No, okay, is not here. Second deputant is Ingrid Boudet, No More Noise Toronto. Welcome to committee, you have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to share my thoughts on the Night Economy Working Group's update. First of all, my name is Ingrid Boudet, and I'm founder of No More Noise Toronto. We're a grassroots organization that focuses on noises that wake us up, keep us up, and disturb us day and night. I've got limited time, so the rest of you know pretty much what we're up to. I do want to say, my screen isn't advancing. Let's do this. So I do want to say that No More Noise Toronto is very thankful to be working with the Night Economy Working Group and that we are one of the external members. It's been great to be invited, and I share my comments with you in a collaborative vein. So a healthy night economy requires a responsive municipal framework that enables nighttime business and culture to thrive while balancing the needs of all city residents and visitors. So I like to get information from people, and so I want to know how amplified sound bothers people. We have a survey out there. We've got 33 responses so far. And basically, how many nights do people hear amplified sound between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m.? Over 80% hear that over 3 to 4 times a week during the summer. They usually hear it between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., and Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights are the most common nights. The health impacts of this noise, though, are significant. In the bottom right, the question is, have you been unable to work or not perform your activities of daily living due to this noise? 80% answer yes. So to me, we do not have a balance in this, in the night economy at the moment. I'll leave the other ones for you to see at your leisure. So a picture of sound, I take measurements, and this is what amplified sound looks like on my meters. And this was an inside measurement that the location was 62 meters away by the hypotenuse, and the LEQ for this event was 52.4 over 37 minutes. So this would have been in contravention of the noise bylaw. So my big recommendation here is to look at the amplified sound reporting process, because this is what it looks like right now. Across the top is the eating and drinking establishments that are having a really good time. The person at 12:30 in the morning gets woken up and doesn't know what to do. They call 311. They don't know what kind of process they're getting into. Apparently, this is where there's going to be, there's a priority action approach of 3 different priority levels. Does the person know what priority level they are assigned to? Basically, within a week or so, bylaw officers will come at 12:30 in the morning on Thursday and see if the noise is happening. And if it's not happening then, because it happens to be a cloudy night, as it is on in the graphic here, then they need to come back. They need to come back again to get an ambient measurement, a loud measurement. We don't know how many measurements there may be. And then in the meantime, the person doesn't really know what's going on, and we don't know if the business has been ticketed, if they're going to court, if they're fines, or if their business license has been revoked. So basically, the person has no permanent change. And I'm at 3 minutes.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the deputant? Wow. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Wow.
The last deputant is Daniel Tate.
That's disappointing.
Is Daniel Tate online? No? Okay, that concludes our deputations. And are there any questions of staff? No. Speakers? We have Councillor Ainsley here to speak.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here, I guess, on behalf of my staff. I'm sorry, I'm here on behalf of myself of the City of Toronto's Night Economy Champion. The report before you is basically the summary of our internal working group, our external working group. The first deputant, Ingrid, sits on our external working group. Ingrid, thanks for coming in today. and all of your work that you do around noise in the city. You know, often people say to me the night economy, you know, they think it's something new, but it's been here forever. It's evolving. You know, as you see in the report, it's kind of looked at from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And it has many different aspects. I like to say to it, you know, there's the daytime and the nighttime in the city of Toronto. It's really a 24-hour economy. It's not just around what happens at our nightclubs and bars and restaurants. When I was first appointed as the night economy champion, I had a lot of people coming to me at the 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. Their biggest concern was how to get to work. How am I getting home from work? How am I going to get my shopping done? How am I going to meet my family's needs? Because they work all night or they work into the night. So, you know, what the night economy we're really looking at doing is making sure that we have that 24-hour economy in the city of Toronto, that we're supporting all of our residents, that we're finding that balance and needs. You can see the membership in the attached report of all of the different services, a broad range of services within the internal working group. And then the external working group, once again, it's not just about restaurants and bars. It's a wide range of, you know, Destination Toronto, the BIAs, No More Noise Toronto, you know, the Scarborough Arts. It's a range of people and representing organizations and departments right across this city as we try to make our night economy, 24-hour economy work properly right across the city and find this balance so we ensure that the city of Toronto succeeds from one end to the other. And I'd ask everybody for their support on the reports that are before us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I think I'll just say thank you to the working group. I think I concur with my colleague, the night mayor, Councillor Ainsley, that the night economy is a lot more than just nightclubs and bars. So people are working in manufacturing on all night. They're working in care work significantly in shifts in a number of different industries, printing, things that happen 24 hours a day, and the concerns are around transit and safety and access. But we spend a lot of time here on the management of liquor, essentially, and how we're doing that. We're spending a lot of time on the noise implications, and I just want to highlight that there are a number of different reports on noise coming in 2025 and 2026. We have more night economy licensing reports coming in 2025 in 2 different quarters, and I think that I would love to see and expect to see as a councillor with a thriving night economy and as chair of this committee that we are going up one level and looking across the board at all of the intersecting questions here, particularly when it comes to nighttime activity that requires bylaw enforcement. And you know, there's a significant gap in not having overnight bylaw enforcement. And there's a reasonable expectation by residents that they will be able to report bylaw infractions. And at the same time, the management of liquor is really important because selling alcohol gives great returns. And places that can sell alcohol and sell it longer are going to have a comparative economic advantage over places that can't. What happens as a result is that areas or places where alcohol is sold and profits are greater ends up driving up lease costs. And the cost of commercial has a huge impact on a local economy. So we can't divorce these things, and I know there's a lot more work to do, and that will continue to be done by the public service and with the engagement of council. Those are my remarks, and I see no other speakers on this. Councillor Fletcher to speak.
Yes, thank you. Thanks.
Go ahead.
I just want to follow up with what you said, Councillor Ainsley, and this people that there is a 24-hour economy. I don't want to focus on all the bars and restaurants and all the issues there, but there are people that do work all night. There are people that have to go to work very early. And I remember when there's the Blue Line, which is the bus that goes all the way across Bloor at night, takes people out. There's certain transit routes that are all night routes. And there was a discussion at one point that they should be cut. I think that Councillor Ainsley, you'll remember that because we were together at that time on City Council. And I just want to underscore the importance of public transit for the night economy, and that we make sure that we don't cut those services that allow people to get to work. And we're careful when we're thinking about saving money, that we're also thinking about saving a good work environment for people that have to work at night, which Councillor Easley, you spoke very eloquently about. So those are just my remarks today, Councillor Bravo.
Thank you, Councillor. And to receive the item, adopt the recommendations on the item. Thank you to the clerk. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried, and that concludes our agenda for this meeting. Thank you to all the staff and to the many deputants, and I want to particularly say to the people that came to speak to committee, you know, I appreciate their grace that everyone showed with the time limit that we needed to ensure that we were able to finish the agenda. Being down 2 members today has put a lot of pressure, and I want to thank my colleagues, Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Moyse, for sitting tight in your chairs all this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.